Hi there. We'll start at exactly 1 o'clock and let me know if you can hear me. Perfect. We will start at exactly 1 o'clock, which is 1 minute from now. With the snow, I imagine we're going to be a very small group. It's recorded, and any session notes as well as the video will be sent out to everybody that's registered. And we'll get ready in just a moment. All right. So, because I only allotted myself a half hour to cover basically one of my favorite topics ever. I'm going to be talking really fast. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I will be answering all of those questions in my follow-up information. So, while I may not be able to answer them live, I will absolutely answer them when we're able to. This is option one, securement basics and best practices. This is for wheelchair securement. And here we go. So today we are going to cover a variety of topics. This is basically Securing Wheelchairs 101, but I do want to kind of give you a little bit of background on the work and just kind of some of the lessons that we've learned over the past several years. So, very first of all, who are we? I am part of Safe Kids Grand Forks. Now, Safe Kids is an international organization. It's dedicated to reducing unintentional childhood injury. Our organization, our coalition, Safe Kids Grand Forks, has been around for nearly 35 years, which is amazing. I myself have been with Safe Kids for 4 years. I'm Tina Sanders. I've been a child passenger safety technician for uh, 6 years now. I've been an instructor since 2020, and I really that year also delved into the training of school bus safety and child passenger safety on school buses, and have gotten the opportunity to travel all over North Dakota and Minnesota sharing that information. So that's us. Now, why are we choosing to do this? Like I said, Safe Kids work is specifically to prevent unintentional injury. Now, wheelchair and mobility device users have particularly complex needs when it comes to motor vehicle transport. And unfortunately, misuse related to their securement leads to some really dire outcomes, particularly during routine driving. So, quick stops, sharp turns. Unfortunately, if they are secured inadequately, just those routine driving tasks and incidences can lead to severe injury or even fatality. We are just motivated to share this information, even more so because we were contacted by a local parent of a student who was in high school at the time and uses a wheelchair. So I want to share with you the video on the next slide. I do want to just highlight for you the fact that while it is shortened for time and the other student that's not involved, his face is blurred. The student in question, she is there with permission from her mother. And there is some coarse language in it. I apologize for that, but I just wanted to share this with you. We can go ahead and pause right there. Um, Sorry, this ended up skipping me way forward. Did not want to do that. The young woman in the video, if you may have noticed, was secured only with the wheel retractors on the aisle side, and there was no lap and shoulder belt that was in use. As a matter of fact, from what I understand, the staff was not trained in using lap and shoulder belt on wheelchair passengers and didn't know that that was something that they should have been doing. The young lady, I think, believe she was a 17-year-old high school student at the time, nonverbal. She did end up with suffering a concussion and some other injuries. That one makes my heart beat fast every time I watch it, and I have watched it, no exaggeration, probably 100 times. But what is so upsetting is that this is not an uncommon misuse. This is something that happens really frequently, unfortunately. So we're going to talk about how to prevent such injuries. All right. And so, very first of all, let's talk getting onto the bus for our wheelchair users. So, one of the very common misuses I see with regard to wheelchair lift use is the direction. On most wheelchair lifts, I'm not talking ramps, but most wheelchair lifts, the passenger must face outward, so away from the building or away from the bus or the vehicle when they're loaded onto the lift. They need to have their wheels locked. And if they're a power chair, they need to actually be powered off so that they're not accidentally triggered and they go off the front or the back. The lift operator, while they are moving the lift, need to have a hand on that wheelchair at all times. Make sure that everybody is clear around the lift as it's in operation. So when using a lift, that vehicle needs to be parked on very flat, level ground, and it needs to be fully deployed. So if it's got some sort of obstacle that it may hit, that's not a great place for it to deploy. So it needs to deploy fully onto the ground before that person is loaded onto it. And like I said, this is something that I do periodically see as misuses, particularly that direction. And I think that, again, it goes right back to people maybe haven't been formally trained on use. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, we have a variety of different kinds of securement equipment out there that you might see in any kind of motor vehicle. I work primarily in buses, but you might see some of this equipment in maybe city buses or even private vehicles, so transport vans and things like that. The two main players are the companies Qstrength and Sherlock. They are sister companies. They're actually one and the same, and as far as where they're housed and that sort of thing. They operate fairly similarly, but you cannot mix and match their products. So for one passenger, the securement equipment needs to be all Qstrength, needs to be all Sherlock, can't mix and match. What you see on the right-hand side is the older style of securement. So this M series, it does meet minimum specifications as far as securement, but these are operator active devices. They have to be ratcheted down manually. And frankly, they're probably real old if you do have these. These are not something that are commonly sold any longer. So if you have this kind of securement, you might want to look into going ahead and upgrading. Now, it is really important that regardless of what kind of securement system you're using, make absolutely sure that you know how to operate it. Know whether or not you have a retractor that automatically locks at some juncture, or whether you need to turn a knob or push a button in order to make sure that that is locked and it will no longer move so that it's secured for that passenger. Just absolutely know your equipment. A lot of times these retractors will lock into L track is what we call it. It's that stuff with the circles. Sometimes they run kind of in lines front to back in the bus. Sometimes they will run side by side, so from the window to the aisle. Either one is acceptable and fine. And the majority of the buses, I would have to say pretty much every bus that I have gotten onto in our region uses L track. And those retractors just pop in and out of the L track. They lock in there. The challenge can be with L track is that they'll actually accumulate debris. Honestly, if you're dealing with kids on a bus, they just come with debris. That's kind of their thing. But the other challenge that we have living in the north is that the exposure to moisture from snow and rain, as well as sand and road salt and things like that, not only can cause more debris to collect, but these can absolutely corrode over time due to the exposure of that. They do absolutely recommend that you sweep the track out regularly to avoid all that accumulation. And you can even wash those fittings with soap and water. They will even allow using a dry graphite lubricant. So having some sort of system in place for cleaning and maintaining the L track is very important. One of the other things that they strongly recommend, and this is pretty much any of the manufacturers will tell you this, it's really important to remove the retractors from the L track daily. Now, in this area, I know that we kind of do a set it and forget it. We will get it installed to fit the wheelchairs that we may be transporting this year or this semester and leave them right there. And I feel like that's really super common. So they don't get into the habit of removing them daily, inspecting that track, making sure that there's nothing gumming it up that may cause that retractor to fail. Unfortunately, that is one of the things that can happen. The corrosion because of that aluminum track that's in the steel bus floor that has iron fittings on the retractor, all of these metals working together can lead to that corrosion. The other thing is, if you have a route where you're not transporting somebody in a wheelchair, we've got these giant hulking tripping hazards in our bus. So strongly recommend definitely to remove them daily. If that is not possible, they do need to have some sort of scheduled removal so that they can be cleaned and properly inspected. Now, one of the things that I want to absolutely stress is that wheelchair users, mobility device users need to be loaded into the bus forward facing only. There are a few exceptions. There are some bus securement, and I'm seeing those predominantly on like city buses, on municipal buses, where the securement system specifically has them seated rear facing. What we never ever want to see is for wheelchair users to be seated sideways. In a crash, they will absolutely suffer a great deal of injury, perhaps fatality. So side facing is absolutely not allowed. And one of the things that we've seen is, we've got a short period or short space for wheelchair securement. We have two people, but there's only room for one. So if we turn them sideways, two people will fit. Well, unfortunately, that is setting them up for potential for tremendous injury. Our retractors, when we place them for securement, they need to be in the rear, kind of in a narrow location, and in the front, they need to be wider. So that wider in the front, that's going to stabilize that chair, but it's also going to minimize any contact with the passenger's legs. So it's going to give them room for their legs to be in the back. We want them narrower because that is going to prevent some of that forward inertia or that tendency to tip forward in like a quick stop or something like that. So wide in the front, narrow in the back. And usually, if we've got that front to back running L track, they're going to be kind of set in that configuration anyway. Sometimes we'll have that side to side L track so that you can kind of play with it and maneuver a little bit and change that out. So do keep that in mind. Sometimes the location for wheelchair securement, unfortunately, may be too small for some of these much larger chairs. ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, set the standard size that a securement location must be. And this was set back in the 1970s. And those very, very large chairs, the scooter mobility devices, things like that, they didn't exist or they weren't very commonly used then. Now we have those very large power chairs. We have some power chairs that assist that wheelchair user to lean back and recline so that they can keep their airway free. We have a lot of really nice new technology in wheelchairs, but unfortunately, that standard space set aside is very small for some of those chairs. So locations may not be large enough for the devices. I will say we are going to discuss this a little further in next week's session. So come back and see me next Tuesday. But that's something just to absolutely keep in mind. All right, so we have basically three essential principles for securing a wheelchair. Keep in mind in order to secure that wheelchair firmly to make sure that it's not going to move any more than it has to, and to keep that passenger a little bit safer if they're riding within it. So we want to find a solid welded frame member. We want to make sure that the webbing from the retractor to attach to the chair is at as close to a 45-degree angle as possible, and that it's making a direct path from that retractor to where it's connecting. We're going to delve into that a little bit. So solid or welded frame members in the front and the rear of the device are what we want to aim for. Now, we want to just make sure that there's no moving parts, basically. Now, I want you to also keep in mind that manufacturers very specifically note that these devices are not meant for motor vehicle transport. So usually it's going to be a judgment call on the behalf of the operator what that strongest point might be. One of the things that you might keep in mind is that sometimes chairs, and you'll see in the video in a little bit, will have attached loops or things like that where securement is meant to take place. Sometimes though, because those may be bolted or welded on, they can come loose. So check those out as well. Make sure that they are solid and usable. What we want to avoid absolutely is no moving parts. So we want to make sure that we're not attaching to wheels or removable footrests, any crossbars for a folding chair that might fold, and anything plastic. We don't want to attach to anything plastic that can break away. So just making sure that we are attaching to something that is solid is going to give us the best chance in the case of any kind of incident. Next, we want to look for, and arguably our most important element in this is looking for a 45-degree angle from that retractor to the attachment to the device. So we want to aim for that general guideline, and sometimes the closest to that 45-degree angle that you're going to find is if you attach near the seat or kind of where the passenger's backside. If you can kind of achieve that, that's great. This is a visual. I'm not expecting everybody to bring out, compasses or protractors or anything and actually measure. Just kind of be aiming for roughly a 45-degree angle. And that's a little diagram to kind of show you how you might achieve that as far as where that might be. And of course, we do want that direct path. I will say that there have been a lot of people that I've worked with in this work that have been trained for years and years that you're going to get a stronger securement if you cross the like webbing or the straps. Oftentimes, we have people that come to driving bus that have been in the trucking industry for a long time, and you absolutely do that when it comes to cargo. However, with wheelchairs, we do not want to cross any of those straps. We also want to avoid any significant twisting, and we don't want to route it through wheels or through frame members. We want to have kind of a direct hold there. So these are some of the things that we just would not want to see. Sometimes we might see like a small quarter or half twist from that retractor to where we're attaching, and that may be unavoidable, and that's okay in order to kind of get that hook around it. But any of the significant twisting we do not want to see. So the video I'm going to show you next, a couple of videos. This is some demonstrations that I did securing some devices. There's no sound, so I'm going to kind of talk you through it. So those are our 3 essential principles. So the floor retractors I'm using are self-ratcheting, so they will automatically lock in order to release and make the webbing longer. I can push that red button. One of the things that we want to note though, is that they kind of have a dead zone where you can make the webbing longer or shorter. And it's kind of where that tag is sewn. When you're securing the wheelchair, you want to be able to see the tag, because once the tag gets inside of the retractor, then it unlocks the webbing. So we don't want that. We want to be able to see the tag. Now, when we are securing our person, like I said, some wheelchairs have some hooks that are attached, kind of looking at some different spots where I could attach. But that hook seems to be meant for it, and it does have those in the front and the back. So that's something that we might try. And so you see me here trying to get those hooks attached to those front ones. Noticing I'm avoiding using the footrests. We don't want to use the footrest as an attachment point. And in the back, I'm also attaching to the installed loops there. Right, so you can see right here that I'm pretty close to a 45-degree angle in the front. With this particular wheelchair where I've got it secured, the angle is a little shallower than I would like. And this is what we don't want to see. We never want to see these straps crossed. And sometimes it may feel like you get a better fit or a tighter fit that way, but this is just not something that the manufacturer wants you to do. So these straight lines, direct paths, this is what you want to achieve with these. All right. Okay. So the next thing that we would want to do is make sure that we are locked into place. We can do that by turning those knobs on the retractors. If we've got those automatic retractors, we can do a push-pull test, and I'll demonstrate that in a video just a second. Some of these standard retractors, you will have to turn the knob or press a red lever in order to make sure that that retractor is locked. So definitely know your equipment. So with this, like I said, I can turn that knob if I want to, and that will make sure that she's completely tightened in there. Or I can push and pull, and that's really going to help also the passenger feel a little bit more secure because otherwise, if I come to my first stop in my vehicle, that's going to ratchet in and tighten it, and it may do it really abruptly, leading to really a scary ride. So we want to go ahead and make sure that we're not doing that. All right. And then sometimes we don't have a good spot to connect to. So that's when we might utilize a webbing loop. And these are crash tested. You can wrap them or connect them in order to give yourself that 45-degree angle or give yourself a location to attach that hook. All right, now the next element to securement is going to be passenger securement. And just like any of us riding in any kind of vehicle, we need to have a seatbelt on, or we need to be in a car seat or booster seat if we are smaller, if we're a child. So we need to have a lap and shoulder belt because even if the wheelchair has an internal seatbelt, those are usually not crash tested. They're just for positioning. So they're not going to secure that person in the case of a crash. Once again, most of these incidences that a person is going to experience are going to be from routine driving, short stops, abrupt turns, that sort of thing. Crashes, particularly in buses, are very, very rare. So it is so, so important that we keep that person in their mobility device. They have noted that people who are ejected from their mobility device in the case of a crash or a short stop or something like that are far, far more likely to have an injury or even fatality. I believe that it's something like 90% more likely to have a severe injury or fatality if they are ejected from their mobility device. So our main goal needs to be to keep them in there if that's how they're going to ride. So our shoulder belt needs to fit right on their shoulder, just like it would if you were buckling up in your car. So we need it to be between the neck and the edge of the shoulder. It needs to be uh, coming from just above and behind their shoulder. So if you need to raise or lower where the retractor for the shoulder belt is attached, you can do that. There also should be some way to adjust it up and down. And sometimes you may even want to scoot the chair further forward or further back if that will give you a little bit better fit. That height adjuster, though, is going to be your best friend when it comes to that. Our lap belt needs to be down low on the hips, and the buckle needs to be hip bone, not in the middle. Just like the seatbelt in your car is down at your side, you want that belt to be there. And again, there's going to be a adjuster for that. So this is a little sketch of kind of how our securement is going to need to look. And here's a very brief video. So like I said, this needs to be moved down for the passenger size because that seatbelt happens to be way too high. So sometimes you can move it down in the L track if you've got that style. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm moving it downward. And then with that, it's going to be a little closer to just above and behind her shoulder. Now, one of the cool things about these products is you've got some stiffened, thicker webbing at the end of these belts. That makes it a lot easier for you to thread that from between the person's body and their wheelchair. We never ever want the belt to be routed over armrests or over wheels. We want it to be as close to their body as possible. And unfortunately, when you are a wheelchair user, you kind of have people up in your personal space all the time. So that thickened webbing really does give them a little bit more separation from that person that may be helping them. And that's the same with the lap belt there. So just making sure that that threads through, it is buckled appropriately and at her hip. All right, so who can travel in a wheelchair? One thing that I want to point out to you is that literally every single wheelchair manufacturer manual that I have looked at says something to the effect that when feasible, wheelchair occupants should not ride in the motor vehicle while seated in their wheelchair. They should transfer to a vehicle seat. Every single one of them that I've looked at has said this. The wheelchairs typically are not crash tested. There is some classifications of wheelchair, usually called a WC19, that are crash tested, but in general, they are not. These devices very frequently, if they are put into a crash test situation, some manner of it will fail. Some of them even have minimum weight that a person has to achieve before they can sit in that device in a motor vehicle. Oftentimes it's around 50 pounds. So just keep in mind that if you're calling up the manufacturer saying, hey, where do I secure it to? They're probably going to tell you, hey, that person should not be riding in that. So just kind of to keep that in mind. So the best practice is always to transfer them to the vehicle seat. Use the factory installed seat belt. If they are a child, transfer them to an appropriate child passenger safety restraint system, car seat, something like that. If they are under 50 pounds, if there is a minimum weight stated, they need to transfer to some sort of passenger restraint. That is very important. Um, so just making sure that if it is at all feasible and you can consider that to go ahead and make that transfer. Do keep in mind that with ADA rules, oftentimes if you are having to comply to ADA rules as opposed to the education rules with a child's IEP or something like that, ADA states that you can ask the passenger or the wheelchair user to transfer to a seat. You cannot require it. So just keep that in mind. Now, let's get real. Honestly, transferring may be difficult or even impossible for a number of reasons. So sometimes we have people who they're in their wheelchair in a very specific angle or recline because they have perhaps airway obstruction that they cannot sit upright. Unless you are a very, very small child and can sit in a rear-facing car seat, there's not really any reclined options for you on a regular vehicle seat. So their wheelchair is absolutely a life-saving device in that it's keeping their airway free or open. Sometimes there is medical equipment, feeding tubes, oxygen tanks, things like that are very complicated to transfer, not something that is able to transfer to a seat and then back to the wheelchair. Sometimes people are too large for that operator to move them from the wheelchair to a vehicle seat. We've got to be realistic. One of the very important tenets of child passenger safety is good, better, best. Is it best practice for that person to sit in the vehicle seat or in a car seat? Absolutely, it is. But it is far better than, you know, if they are correctly secured with those 4-point wheelchair securement and the 3-point passenger securement than no securement at all. So we really sometimes have to pick our battles, knowing that best practice is one thing and what is absolutely able for us to achieve is sometimes totally different. Okay, so I do absolutely want to encourage questions. I'll totally stick around for a little bit, as well as you can put questions in the chat if you don't feel comfortable speaking up. But I did want to point out to you that next Tuesday, we're going to be troubleshooting and looking at some real world challenges. I'm borrowing some different kinds of wheelchairs so that I can show some securement of some maybe a little bit more tricky devices. If you have not registered for next week's or the January session, there's a QR code right there for you to do that. And one thing that I really did, I have a lot of thanks to folks for allowing me to do this. I know I'm over time and I apologize. Above all else, I do want to thank Q-Strength for all the information that they've given to apply to this. And I really want to thank our Safe Kids Grand Forks Coalition and especially my boss, Karma Hansen, for allowing me to pursue this, noting that I get really passionate about wheelchairs and about bus and that sort of thing. I am the resident bus nerd at our office, and I just really thank them for letting me kind of pursue this nerdy thing that I feel really passionate about. So that is it for today. Thank you for sticking with me for this extra 5 minutes. Super appreciate you. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Amelia, is that you asking me? Oh, yeah. Let me,
Yeah, it's not an urgent thing, but
yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm going to stop my recording here and we can
okay.
talk about that a little bit.